Hello, my government children. Welcome back. We are going to move on to chapter 14 today, which is about political parties. We are going to focus on how they used to be and how they've changed over time and how they affect our system today. So let's look at their functions first, and then we're going to look at how they've changed over time. So, what is a political party? They are an organized group of people whose goal is to get people elected into political office. Sometimes party leaders are challenged within their own ranks. I think we're going to see that come January 3rd with the House of Representatives. And we see different people become different leaders sometimes. Like, for instance, in 2016, for the Republicans, we see these outsiders of Donald Trump, and the Democrats, this outsider of Bernie Sanders, who basically were like, realized people were sick of parties as usual and politics as usual and went after the parties. And they were both populist candidates, meaning like for the people. It's just they had a different way of addressing how things should be done, but they were both basically saying the government's been bad. They're a bunch of elitist establishment people running the show, and I'm here to change things. So here's just some examples. You see Bernie, Bernie had a huge following, a cult-like following, as does Donald Trump, where basically people were very fed up with what they saw as like Washington as usual, politics as usual, and wanted something different. And both of them promised something different, something very different. So what are parties like? What besides the fact that they're trying to become office holders, that's part of a party. If you're an office holder, that means like, okay, I'm president of the United States, I'm Republican, I am a party as an office holder. But what about the organizations? These are the people behind the scenes that work for the party. Like, they get paid to work for the party, and they work nonstop, even well after elections, because they have a lot of different goals. They want to constantly keep their people getting reelected, so they have to do stuff nonstop. So here's some of the things they do as the organization. So like if you've ever gone to like, you might see like a DeKalb County Republican Party headquarters, or you might see Kendall County Democratic Party headquarters. That's the party as the organization. So what are some of the things they do? Well, they unite people with shared socioeconomic and ideological goals. They're trying to find people that would be good candidates for office. That's what they did with Barack Obama. He wasn't necessarily seeking out office. They sought him out. They educate and mobilize voters, let them know what's going on, and try to get them to the polls. They raise money. They develop media strategy. And then they try to streamline the voice of the party through a national platform. And they basically are, their goal is to ultimately, like I said, get candidates into office. But sometimes outside groups can actually influence candidates even more than parties sometimes. And we've seen this in the past couple of elections. So what is, the three groups of the political party, the party, the organization, like I just taught you, the party of the party office holders, the people who are actually getting into office, and then the party of the electorate. That's just, if you identify as a political party, then you are the party of the electorate. So like, it's kind of like that episode of The Office when Michael Scott threw his hands up in the air and yelled, "I declare bankruptcy." That's pretty much what all you have to do to identify as a member of a party. You just have to say, "I am a Democrat," or "I am a Republican," and that's it. You're part of the party. Congratulations, you are now part of the party of the electorate, because the electorate are the people who elect the party candidates. How do people vote according to party identification? It used to be straight ticket voting. People pretty much said, if I'm a Republican, I'm voting all Republican. Do people still do that? Absolutely, on both sides. But now we've seen a growing number of people claiming to be independent, not necessarily of one party or the other. So they tend to vote split ticket voting, where they vote some Republicans and some Democrats on the same ballot. Here's an example of a ballot from 2016 that shows party identification and their party affiliation. So you can see that they have Democrats in one part, and they have Republicans in a different part. So that how does party affiliation help as a cue to voters? Basically, you have to think about it like this. They're like, okay, Democrats are the ones that do this, or Republicans are the ones that do this. That's going to kind of help you remember on how to vote. So looking at party identification, which side, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what do people identify as? Do they identify as Republicans or Democrats or whatever? Well, here you go. Over time, as you can see, more people, the plurality of people, have identified as independent. They're like, I don't really side with one party or another. And that has definitely changed over time. For the most part, as you can see at the beginning, most people in the early 90s or mid 90s identified as a Democrat, and then it kind of changed over time. But you can see that the plurality of Americans don't identify one way or another. They typically identify as independent. So here's the question. They're like, okay, what does independent mean? Which way, are you left or are you right? Which way do you lean? If you were to be given a ballot today, who would you tend to vote for? And you can see that more people said that they would be voting for the right than necessarily the left. So moral of the story, when I've shown you guys the 0 to 40 scale before, and I've told you that our country is a right of center party, this bottom graph should show you that right there. So when the party in the government, this is what I was talking about, the actual office holders, they have to basically set the party of the organization tries to set what's known as a party platform, which is what you guys are going to be working on the next couple of days. And this is where they have a statement of their position on policy objectives. So when they have the when they have the national convention every 4 years in the summer, where they officially pick the candidate to run for president in the fall, they also vote on their party platform. And this is basically when they say, okay, here's a million different issues. Here are our belief on these million different issues. And we're going to say this as a national group. And each party has a chair. There's a Republican National Committee chair and then a Democratic National Committee chair, and they're responsible for setting up this convention, for raising money, to serve as a spokesperson for the party. Like, we're talking like in the media and stuff. They also are involved in trying to recruit people to be part of the party as well. And not only recruit people to switch sides, but also to maintain the base. All right, so skipping over that, we're going to move on to how political parties have developed and changed over time. So basically, there's this thing called a party coalition, which is just a group of voters who supports a political party over time. They have changed a lot over the years, but Americans have pretty much either been Democrat or Republican, but the party coalitions have realigned. So this realignment is when basically people who support a political party shift their allegiance to a different one. It usually happens during some type of major critical election. Probably the easiest one to use, the best example, probably the most famous example, would be when the New Deal coalition was created after and during the Great Depression. And the New Deal coalition was just this big new group of people that tended to vote Democrat because of FDR's New Deal. And they've changed over time. There's this thing called the party era that used to happen for a while, where a party would typically win most of the national elections. We saw this go back and forth. From Lincoln to about the 1920s, it was the Republicans party era. And then from about the Great Depression through Johnson, it was the Democratic Party era. But now we see an era of what's known as divided government, where it started since 1969, and we don't see one party dominate for a while. Typically, a divided government is where you have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and one of those three is ruled by a different party than the other two. And that's very, very common. And we've seen this throughout our modern American party politics. So we've seen some changes with realignment as well. We saw the Republicans move from the Northeast kind of to the South and the West. and now we're starting to see some more realignment as of recently. We saw Reagan kind of switch things around a little bit, where we saw people who are known as Reagan Democrats that liked his idea of lower taxes, small government, and strong defense kind of go away. We're starting to see the realignment of the left to lean a little bit more left. We're starting to see the realignment of the right tending to be more populist. Now, things for a while, and now that's what I'm talking about now. I shouldn't have skipped ahead. I apologize. Let's talk about the 90s. So we talked about the 80s. Reagan had the Democrats for a while. Then we have the 90s. Clinton got a lot of the Republicans. Why? Because he decided to work with what he had going for him. So he won in 92, but then the House and the Senate in 1994 got taken by the Republicans. So he said, well, instead of fighting them, let's work with them. So he definitely worked with that Republican Congress. There was a lot of compromise, and we see some Republicans kind of shift to the left a little bit, but then again, it has constantly gone back and forth. We see a lot of this. We saw a Tea Party emerge because of Obama's economic plan that was the Tea Party saw as socialist. And now we're seeing, like I said today, the left tending to realign themselves a little bit more left, and the right tending to realign themselves in more of a populist movement. So looking at this, remember I said there's divided government? Look at over these last 20 years, 16 years. You can see there's a constant shift back and forth between Republicans and Democrats in the presidency itself, but you can see out of these each every 2 years with the presidential elections and then the midterms, we see that there's tends to be a lot of divided government. So how have they adapted? Well, not only has the left shifted more left and the right shifted more populist, it's causing what's known as polarization. So it's really hard for like the Republicans and the Democrats to kind of work in a Clinton, Newt Gingrich-esque style we saw in the 1990s because people are so polarized. And voters pretty much, it's kind of like we're seeing a lot right now is voters hate the other side more than they like their side. And that sounds kind of bizarre, but I saw this a lot in 2016. So I'll give you an example. A lot of people didn't vote for Hillary because they loved Hillary. They really voted for Hillary because they hated Trump, and vice versa. A lot of people weren't like, yeah, Trump is so amazing. They just hated Hillary Clinton, and that's why they voted for him. And we saw that a lot in the 2020 election as well, but more so with the Biden voters. The Biden voters were more like, well, I'm not like huge on Biden as much as I am anti-Trump. And that's because of party polarization. So we've definitely seen that over time. So what advice would you give both the Democratic and Republican parties to help them retain their party faithful while encouraging new groups of voters to support them? Do they stand strong on their opinions? Do they get emotional? Do they get one-sided? Do they get floaty dancy and try to say something that appeases to both sides? How exactly do you do that? That is being stuck between a rock and a hard place. I tell you that right now. So you're actually going to see the platforms of the political parties over the next couple of days, and you can kind of see what these parties are trying to do. Are they trying to sway both sides, or are they sticking to their guns?